The Labour Party now has its new aims and values, but does all that add up to an idea big enough to seize the popular imagination and inspire a whole raft of clearly identifiable new policies? Well, some in the party believe that an American professor now visiting London has developed just that, the idea of community. He's Amitai Etzioni, and he's been telling Peter Kellner about what he believes a sense of community is all about.
In the Old Kent Road, in an open space where bombs had once come screaming down, they sang and danced.
For many, this was the golden age of the community spirit, VE Day, when families filled the streets to celebrate victory in a war in which the British people had worked so closely together. Amitai Etzioni wants to recapture that spirit. Last night he came to London to deliver a lecture on communitarianism. It's an ugly word that expresses an important idea which is ruffling political feathers on right and left on both sides of the Atlantic.
That we must talk about the moral and social foundation of our society.
Communitarianism starts from the view that two kinds of individualism have failed: the social rights-based individualism of the left and the free market individualism of the right. Etzioni argues that both threaten to dissolve the glue that holds societies together unless we recreate the kind of civil society in which we agree on what's right and what's wrong and cooperate to apply those principles. In some ways, those ideas are familiar enough. Most people yearn for social harmony, even if they disagree on how to achieve it. But Dr. Etzioni has caused a stir because he goes further. He claims that communitarianism is a fully fledged social philosophy which deserves to rank alongside and to some extent displace the liberalism of both left and right.
Liberals are afraid to touch the questions of what the future of the family is going to be like. They don't like the term moral values. They shy away from that. They don't want to deal with the question of public safety and crime. They cede all these areas to the conservatives. And it's our argument that you have to address these issues in a new way, not by imposing values, not by authoritarian answers, but a new dialogue in which all parts of the community will come together to some democratic, inclusive answers.
Communitarianism is the inspiration behind one experiment in Birmingham. St. Paul's Community School takes problem children and works with them in small classes.
We create an atmosphere which they describe as a bit like one's own family, where people, of course, are concerned to help each other as people with a long-term interest in each other's lives.
Communitarianism there is undoubtedly benign. The whether St. Paul's is that different from other good schools is a moot point. But across the Atlantic in Wisconsin, communitarianism has been taken much further. It uses not just encouragement, but coercion to stamp out antisocial behavior, and people are beginning to protest. The Wisconsin state government has cut by £20 a week the welfare benefits from families with truant children.
I think not only is it a good idea for government to encourage people to be good citizens, I think it's incumbent upon government to be sure that any benefits that government puts forth for citizens, that it is done within the context of good citizenship. And we feel it incumbent that they learn to develop family behavior and parenting and job skills that will allow them to be self-sufficient.
It's in the area of family policy that Dr. Etzioni himself is most specific.
The most important thing we have to attend to is the neglect of children by two parents and one parent and no parent families. And we need to enable parents to be more of parents. In the lower parts of the income, we have to have more family leave. We should make it easier to work at home, flex time, shared jobs, everything possible to emphasize and send a message that parenting is very, very important for the children, for the parents, and for our social future.
Should single parents be discouraged?
We should encourage people to get married responsibly, so premarital counseling. We should teach them how to communicate better, and we should therefore make marriages more workable, and that will take care of the rest.
How should the state do that?
It's not a state business. We have, for instance, it's a school's business. It's a church's business. It's not a government issue. It's a societies don't change by government. Societies change when the people talk to each other about what's wrong with the environment, what's wrong with the way we treat women, and now what's wrong with our moral and civil order.
Aren't you more of a secular evangelist than a policy consultant, as it were, in the process of national life?
If I have to choose between those two, then you certainly characterize me correctly.
Among left-wing thinkers in Britain, communitarianism is proving controversial, not just because of its view of the state, but because of its underlying social analysis.
Communitarianism presupposes a greater degree of cultural consensus than exists in any modern society, and in particular than exists in Britain. In Britain, at the national level and at lower levels, such communities as exist are characterized by diversity, complexity, and conflict. The communitarian project risks being nostalgist in attempting to roll back this diversity and conflict in our culture.
Dr. Etzioni rejects that view, but his demand for consensus creates a harsh dilemma. Should it be imposed through firm rules and hence risk turning communitarianism into an authoritarian creed? Or should we rely on goodwill and exhortation, in which case communitarians may fail to achieve the idyllic society they want? The same dilemma faces the Labour Party, now that it's shifting from an ideological to an ethical view of socialism. Whether Dr. Etzioni has the right answers is a matter of debate. What is certain is that he is asking a number of the right questions.
Peter Kellner, and I've got two Labour MPs with me, Angela Eagle, on the whole, the left of the party, and Malcolm Wicks, who is a close supporter of Tony Blair's modernising strategy. Mr. Wicks, anything here for Labour to latch onto?
Yes, there are things for Labour to latch onto. It doesn't mean we swallow whole the whole communitarian package, partly because it's an ugly word, communitarianism. But in terms of the emphasis on community, that's something the Labour Party is taking very seriously. And in terms of getting the balance right between the rights of citizens and their responsibilities, that's a bit of simple social philosophy, which actually has a long history here in Britain. But I think it's a very good way into some of the key social policy issues in Britain.
But you sure that this word community is not just a nice-sounding word that makes it attractive to you because it sounds so nice?
Well, I mean, it is a nice-sounding word, and we should beware of that. What we've got to say to ourselves is whether community and the balance of rights and responsibilities and the emphasis on family has meaning and usefulness when it comes to issues about parental responsibilities, which I think we've got to take more seriously in Britain, and also when it comes to the care of elderly people. What are the rights of citizens when it comes to the care of the old, but also what are their responsibilities?
Angela Eagle, clear policy implications then from Malcolm Wicks for this use of communitarianism as an inspiration for policy?
Well, I'm quite sceptical about it, partially because even in your film it was said that governments couldn't affect society. Well, in the last 16 years we've seen how extreme Thatcherism has affected our society. It's torn our social fabric. So I welcome discussions about how we can get back to some kind of fairness in society, but this communitarianism doesn't do that. It has no economic analysis, and clearly I don't think you can look at how to pursue policy as a government without having an economic analysis. Part of the problem with our society in the last 16 years has been this extreme form of market Thatcherism that we've had to live through, and that's rent our society apart.
Should it be more about economics?
Well, there should be more about economics, yes, but I think also in Britain we need more about values, and perhaps that is the strength of Etzioni. He reminds us about that. I mean, I think people in Britain are searching for some foundation stones. They are searching for a distinction between good and bad. They want an ethical foundation, and that's why values has become more important.
How about that?
Well, I'm worried that it's too authoritarian and that it looks back to some kind of golden age that never existed. We have to have the strength and foresight to create a new society, not harp back to something that never really existed in a nostalgic way. Communitarianism doesn't really look within families at some of the problems there are there. It just idealises them. It says nothing about discrimination, it says nothing about distribution of wealth, nothing about the growing role of women in society. In fact, it harps back to rather old-fashioned values.
I agree.